let the record show that we have a quorum present. I'd like to call the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. And today we're dealing with the ICTA and off-reg, and our first 2015-16 financial statements. And our first witness is Mr. Ali Famo, so I'll ask the clerk to go and bring him in.
I swear by the Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this Honorable Legislative Assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Ali, and thanks for coming. As you would have been aware, we're dealing with the ICTA 2015-16 financial statements, and we have some questions about it. When you answer the first question, please state your full name and the position, just for the record for us, please. So I guess my first question is why we are so far behind in the accounts being tabled.
Alifa Amoy, former Managing Director, ICTA, now Deputy CEO, off-reg. I can't speak to why they haven't been tabled. We have provided them to the ministries. It may have been because in the merger we shifted responsible minister from what used to be Plahi, as now CPI, over to the Cabinet Office. I know there were some issues with regarding funding and reporting during the merger that happened last year, but I'm not sure why the reports haven't been tabled. They certainly are available, and we certainly do have the Auditor General's sign off on those reports.
Could you give the committee a commitment that you will investigate where they are through your Managing Director and the Chairman of the Board, and see if we can get lean on the minister? There's a meeting of the Legislative Assembly planned for the 6th of June, so it would be nice to get them brought up to date, because I think we need to my apologies. I should have invited the Auditor General to say a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, PAC members. 14, 15, as you quite rightly say, Mr. Chairman, are the last ones for the ICTA in the public domain and therefore laid in the Legislative Assembly. It was an unqualified opinion, but we did sign off on the 2015-16 financial statements in October 2016, lost a century, and again with an unqualified opinion, and we've recently, at the end of April, signed off on the residual ICTA accounts for 2016-17 up to the period of the 15th of January when ERCO came into existence, again with an unqualified opinion. And we also signed off on ERCO from the 16th of January to the 31st of December with an unqualified opinion. So there's every possibility that if they can be laid in June, they could all perhaps be laid together. The ISA 260 points, i.e. the points that go to those charged with governance, are pretty consistent over the period. And with the new ERCO, as you might expect, there are some sort of set-up things around policies and procedures that we're recommending. But otherwise, they're pretty consistent with the ISA 260 from 14-15. Thank you.
The fact that they have an unqualified opinion, you would think that they would have been there'll be some urgency in getting them tabled given the environment from which we cometh. But we'll leave it to you, Mr. Ali, to try and find out where they are, and certainly, because we regard it as the ICTA responsibility for the 15-16 accounts, and up until January when there was a transition to off-reg. Okay, I have a couple of the questions on the accounts, and then I have some other questions on which I believe I can ask from the accounting position on some of the activities or lack of activities thereof of the actual ICTA in terms of its regulatory role. Are you still in the same office that you were in before off-reg, and has the lease been sorted out?
We are in the same physical location, third floor listed towers. Some years ago, the landlord resisted signing a new lease. ICTA had been there since its inception. The rate per square foot is extremely attractive. We've confirmed this recently, as when off-reg came together, we had to find or try to find new office space to accommodate twice as many staff as ICTA had. So we've gone on the hunt, and we visited a dozen different properties, and we're still trying to effect the move. But we have confirmed that the rate is very good. It's just that the landlord prefers not to sign a long-term lease, and we have not been able to convince him otherwise.
Okay, to the finance department, I know that facilities management is a little bit outside of your brief, Mr. Nixon, but how much of the government administration, the new government administration building, is physically occupied? Now, is we still running on about 80% occupancy, or has it been improved?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure of the exact percentage, but just from my experience, it is probably in excess of 95% occupancy currently.
But in other words, there's no room there for off-reg. Well, I'm not one of those who believes that your ability to regulate is dictated by where you sit. But anyway, there's an optics that I agree. From the accounts, the Auditor General reported that only 8 of 17 licensees actually filed their audited financial statements with you on time. Has that improved?
Yes, it has. We've traditionally had some problems with some of the smaller licensees, especially nonprofit FM radio stations, filing audited financial statements on time. We, in fact, had a problem with Radio Cayman themselves at one point, filing with us on time. The larger licensees, the telcos, tend to be a lot more responsive, as you might expect. But the smaller ones, we have had, historically, have had trouble with some of them. Lately, we have not had any issues. We've had very few problems with financial reporting from all of our licensees.
You mentioned Radio Cayman. You actually regulate how many entities for government? Radio Cayman, government TV channel. Do you have any regulatory stuff over the whole 911 radios and telephones and stuff, or is that outside of your remit?
So anything that requires radio spectrum requires a license typically, unless it's what we call class licenses for things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and those sorts of things, where we follow the FCC's lead on establishing those as class licenses, which don't need individual permits. But if it's a handheld radio, it's transmitting. If it's a site-to-site microwave link, no matter who has it, it requires a license, if for no other reason than to make sure there's no interference. So government does have a number of licenses with us, either for their radio systems, their microwave links to FM transmitting towers, the FM radio licenses themselves for entities like Radio Cayman, the TV license that is currently managed by GIS, And also, for whatever reason, before my time, I guess when the market was liberalized, computer services decided that they wanted a number of licenses. So they actually have licenses that make them look like a telco. So they have an ISP, Internet Service Provider license. They have a number of other licenses. We're concerned about that in that it poses potential conflicts of interest with our single shareholder. But we also have that now on the off-reg side with Water Authority being licensed or will be licensed by the water side of the office.
I guess the follow-up question is, do the government entities that you license pay their fees to you on a regular time, or is that just a book entry that you don't bother to collect?
I am under the opinion that anyone who gets a license should pay. Some of our government licensees are under a different opinion that their license should be free. I'm not aware of any proviso in any of our laws that provides a carve-out for a government licensee. So we remain at odds with some of our government licensees about that. But the actual fees are very small, so it's not worth starting a war over.
Except that the law is a law is a law,
Correct.
right? You have an opinion on that, Mr. FS, as to why these people don't want to pay their fees they're budgeted for, are they?
Mr. Chairman, I would expect that any public entity that's licensed would honor its commitment to pay the fees, and that's the proper way to do it, and that would be the Minister of Finance position.
Okay. So 911 has a number of licenses from you. So were you involved, and you're bound to provide certain technical advice to the whole 911 operation with their radios and communications, or no?
911 in and of themselves do not have a license per se from us. If 911, among other government departments like police and fire, has access to, say, a shared trunk radio, two-way radio system, then those radios and that system would be licensed.
Isn't it been announced in the press quite recently that 911 is basically taking over all of the government radios now with this, what's it, close to $7 million expenditure in new radios, and that's the impression I got from the press, was that I guess probably the right title for it is not 911, but that whole regime of communication. Were you asked to provide any advice to the purchasing of this new radios and communication equipment that we have?
We were not asked to provide advice on that particular purchase, no, Mr. Chairman. I believe the entity that coordinates the management of those systems and applies to us for licenses is HMCI.
Hazard management?
Yes.
Okay.
911 being a separate department.
My mistake, you're correct. But again, my memory seems to tell me that in previous conversations, either with the PAC or with Finance Committee, there was, I recall, some mention by you or some other member that you were putting aside certain funds to upgrade that hazard management system. Were those funds put aside? If so, what happened to those funds? Because we had the budget this year, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. FS, but it's close to $7 million, right? In radios and computerized equipment and.
Mr. Chairman, we'd have to confirm those numbers, but there is a provision in the current budget for this emergency communication.
I think it's at least 6+. It might go all the way up to 7, but it's so close you can smell it. So, did you all start a fund, or is my recollection incorrect?
You are correct, Mr. Chairman. A number of years ago, it came to our attention that a number of our telecom licensees were not connecting their networks directly to 911 for emergency calls, but instead were relying on Cable and Wireless, the original incumbent, to transport that traffic. We felt that that was, first of all, unfair on C&W, the incumbent, that they would be the primary connection for safety of life. And secondly, that for a safety of life issue, we felt that the licensees had a duty of care to their customers and a civic responsibility to ensure that their 911 calls were delivered directly to the 911 call answering center and not rely on some third party to deliver those calls on their behalf. We made representations to the governor at the time to, under the law, make a unilateral change to license conditions for the telephone companies under a provision in the law which spoke to national security, which thankfully she agreed to do. What that did was it made it incumbent and put an obligation on the telcos to connect directly to 911 and deliver their 911 calls directly to 911. As a secondary or backup, they could use another telco, any other telco, in case their primary link failed. In the course of doing all of this, long story short, we discovered that the 911 center's equipment was obsolete and that there was no budget or provision to upgrade it. I prevailed on our board, and they agreed to set aside some funds to help upgrade what we felt was in the national interest. We have project managed an RFP. We have gone all the way to vendor selection stage, but unfortunately, those funds are no longer there.
Well, they didn't just go up like Elijah in the chariot. What happened to the funds? Were they confiscated by central, confiscated is probably not the right word, but were they roped in by central government to provide balancing in the budget, and are those funds now being, what were they used for, or you don't know?
Unfortunately, when we merged into OFREG, both the ERA, the former electricity regulator, and the ICTA brought with them legally required reserves. At the time of the merger, we had $900,000 worth of reserves. Our target was to maintain 5 or 6 months worth of operating expenditure. It's required by law to have the reserve fund. We had allocated a portion of that reserve fund, as is allowed under law, to upgrade the 911 project. When OFREG came into being on the 16th of January 2017, the idea was that the fuels inspectorate, which was beforehand under the Ministry of Plahi, would transfer in, and their operating budget would transfer in as well. That didn't happen. And so we wound up ending the year of fiscal year 2017 in a deficit, having used our reserves to fund this new OFREG entity from an operational standpoint.
So, oh. You want a question? Oh, so when the fuel regulator came into OFREG, they were not allowed to bring their budget? You had to fund them, or was it additional responsibilities that you had to help them fund in addition to their normal, what would have been the fuel regulation before that?
Both. Previously, the team was called the Petroleum Inspectors. Right. Their focus was on quality, safety issues, really around dangerous substances and so forth, and inspecting those. The concept was that that team would come across into this new statutory authority called OFREG, but would expand their remit to regulating the fuels markets, which is a whole separate thing. Safety inspections versus regulating the market in a similar fashion to the way we regulate the ICT market and the ERA was regulating the electricity market. In addition, water regulation was being brought into off-reg as well, which before then was ostensibly under the Water Authority. But of course, there was a conflict there because Water Authority is both a producer and a regulator. So there were additional functions that off-reg was expected to perform, and there was no funding or budget or fees that went along with that. So off-reg ended up its first year in a deficit.
But that, hopefully that has been corrected in the 2018-19 budget, or has it?
No.
Because that would be represented in that would have been, the effects of that would have been on your 2016, July 2016 to December 31st, 2017, which are the accounts that are now being audited by the AOG. So what I guess I need to ask the finance department, what happened to the funds that the fuel people, i.e. the Petroleum Inspectorate, would have had in their budget to cover from January 2017 to December 2017?
I can say, Mr. Chairman, that we got our first payment for what represented the Petroleum Inspectorate budget in January of 2018. So it was.
But that's the new budget now. That would be out of that. That's the 2018, because it's illegal for them to pay your 2017 funds in 2018, isn't it, Mr. Finance? No, that must be the money that is in the 2018-19 budget.
We were told this was a result of the funding that had been owed to us from 2017, and we happily cashed the check, Mr. Chairman, because we were in dire need at the time. We now understand that the third quarter funding for fuels will be paid shortly, which represents $100 and something thousand dollars, so that we will be made whole with respect to what should have come across with the fuels in 2017 shortly.
But I think that we need to tell the Auditor General to look specifically if something wrong with that transaction.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a situation where the expenditure was incurred in 16-17, but the actual cash payment hasn't been made until the 2018 year. And because we're on accrual accounting, that is sufficient. While the appropriation expires, they actually earned the money already. So it's a situation of just drawing the funds down at this point.
And was it the full amount so your reserve has now been made good for the money that you spent on the fuel aspect of off-reg?
I'm afraid not, Mr. Chairman. The funds that that came across in January 2018 and the remainder that are coming across shortly are only that portion, from what I understand, that portion of the fuels budget that was originally allocated to them under PLAHI for the fuels inspectorate function, which is only a part of what off-reg now has under its new remit. Funding for the water regulatory function, funding for the fuels markets regulatory function was not sorted during 2017. We're working with the Cabinet Office and the Cabinet to create funding mechanisms, both short-term and long-term, going forward.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I believe a cabinet paper went forward yesterday to try to rectify a portion of that.
But why are we having to go a cabinet paper when off-reg was in place for a whole year, or certainly during the preparation of the 18-19 budget? So you're saying now that funds were not put in the 18-19 budget for that component of off-reg. So you're having to do what, supplementary expenditure that is going to come to the Legislative Assembly? When? December 2019?
Mr. Chair, it was a Section 11.5, I believe, that went forward. And it was a situation that the Ministry of Finance was advised of the shortfall when the budget process was near completion. I think it was already at the LA for Finance Committee, at the Finance Committee stage before we were made aware of the shortfall in funding. So I'm not sure where the breakdown happened before that point, if it was with the Ministry or if it was something that ICTA was investigating, given the cash flows and so on. I'm not sure where the breakdown happened before that.
But you're confident that it's going to be sorted now to everybody's satisfaction, and this won't turn up in the audit in 2020 of the 18-19 budget.
Mr. Chair, at this point, my understanding is that there was a shortfall from 16-17, which we're looking to address through the payment of some form of cash injection into the IC off-reg. Additionally, we're looking to address the issue with the fuel sector regulation section, and that is also being addressed through an increase in outputs. And then there remains one section that still needs to be reviewed in regards to the Water Authority royalties and whether they'll be paid over to ICT or over to off-reg, or how that process will be handled. And I think that part is still under review. But the other two sections, which gives sufficient cash immediately, will be addressed in the short term. And this just remains the last section for the water regulation side of it.
I'm a little concerned in that this off-reg legislation now is nearly 2 years old. And here we are now trying to sort out where the funds are going to go. And where the funds go should be represented in the legislation, because where are you going to get the statutory authority to do it if it's not in that legislation? And we certainly had enough amendments to that original legislation that we... So the part of the deficit and the comprehensive loss for 2015-16 is going to be addressed in this cash payment now as well. Do we have the numbers on? Do you have the numbers on that here, or?
Mr. Chair, the dollar amounts that have been proposed in the cabinet paper, I believe, were $1 million equity injection for the 16-17 losses, and presumably that would catch them up to December 2017. And I assume then that would cover any kind of losses in 15-16. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, the losses in 15-16 were minor, less than 100,000 for the ICTA as an entity. After that, in 2017, we merged to form off-reg. Off-reg was the budget that we put forward at that time assumed that the funding mechanisms for fuels and water would be sorted, and they were not. So the financial situation at the end of the financial year 2017 for off-reg was bad. As we began 2018 without funding in place, the chairman of our board and myself redid the numbers to strip out the accruals that had been expected in the budget to see what our true cash position was, and discovered that we had only 90 days left of cash. We then alerted the Cabinet Office and the Premier. Ministry of Finance was involved. There was a caucus meeting. A number of options were discussed, and our team, the Cabinet Office, and the Ministry of Finance have really come together to find some solutions to our short-term and longer-term problem.
Yeah, this caucus thing keeps coming up. Why is caucus involved in administrative implementation decisions versus policy? Or maybe that's above your pay grade. Okay. But you understand that there's some, anyway. So I guess the real question is, are you confident that you're going to get this sorted sometime soon? If the cabinet paper went up, but then I'm not sure that the cabinet paper represents what you all, do you recall what the figure was that you all were looking to? And does $1 million sound like it would cover it, or?
Mr. Chairman, the cabinet paper addressed interim funding to help us with operational costs as an office, not specific to any sector, of $1 million. This was derived from discussions that we had with government from 2017, where the funding mechanisms for fuels and water were not in place, and ICT as a sector had collected more royalties than had been budgeted for, 1.4 million above what had been forecast. Our recommendation to government at the time was either allow us to keep excess royalties or repatriate at least $1 million in those unexpected royalties back to OFREG to help with operational costs and give us time to sort through policy and fee and regulatory mechanisms for water and fuel sectors. Unfortunately, that didn't happen either, despite repeated attempts by OFREG to try to push the deal forward. It didn't happen. So we've effectively brought that deal directly to Cabinet through the Cabinet paper and asked for us to either keep royalties of that amount or repatriate to us royalties of that amount. That will cover initial interim funding for us from an operational perspective. The Cabinet paper also addressed an adjustment to an output payment for the fuels sector. I believe it's OUR 8 is the actual output reference, to take it from $150,000, if memory serves, to 1.150 million. What that does is it, as an output payment, funds the fuels sector of OFREG to the end of the year. The Cabinet paper promises to address a number of options for the water sector in a future Cabinet paper. Ministry of Finance suggested that we have further discussions with affected parties, which we do by law anyway. We have to consult before we do anything. But we're taking their advice on some other financial impacts that we may need to consider with regards to water sector regulatory fees. And if I missed anything, I hope my finance colleagues would fill in the gaps.
Mr. Chair, that sounds correct. The output number is URC8. Sorry, URC8. That has been increased from 150,000 up to 1,150,000.
Okay.
In addition to the equity injection for the previous years.
Anybody have another question?
Mr. Chairman, through you to the witness, what happened to the funds that were allocated for the 911 upgrade? Were these funds used elsewhere? And if so, where?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the funds that we had allocated for the 911 upgrade were part of our, at the time, ICTA reserve fund. When we merged, the entirety of that reserve fund was consumed in operating costs of the new entity because there was no funding for large chunks of that new entity.
Chris, you had some questions on the account? It's not very want to get into the regulatory aspect of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the witness, they said an extra 1.4 million was collected in royalties. What was the major driving force behind that extra 1.4 million?
It would have been, the royalties are based on 6% of turnover of our telco licensees. So anything in addition to what had been budgeted or forecast would have been simply the performance from a revenue perspective of our telco licensees. The better they do, the better the royalties are.
Thank you very much for that answer. I thought as much because I did a rough calculation. In order for you to make an additional 1.4 million in royalties, the telcos would have to have increased roughly by $23.3 million in that year in terms of revenues. And with that said, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, on page 8 of the the financial statement, it says, just on the point number 1 in the notes of the financial statement, it reads, the ICTA is responsible for the regulation and license of telecommunication, broadcasting, and all forms of radio transmission that include ship, aircraft, mobile, and amateur radio in the Cayman Islands. The thing that I'm trying to get at, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, is the regulation part of the ICTA in terms of the accounts that we're looking at. When I did my research and I looked at broadband, the cost of broadband internet in North Central America and the Caribbean, I couldn't help but notice that except for 80 at $224.20 average per month, the Cayman Islands had the second highest through the entire Americas at $172.40 per month in terms of cost. When I also look at a report that was done by Forbes on the most and least expensive countries for broadband, it ranged from $5.37 in Iran to as high as $961.22 in Burkina Faso. Of the 196 countries that Forbes looked at, the Cayman Islands was ranked at number 190 with a cost of $175.27 per month, which makes us one of the highest regions in the world when it comes on to costs. Now, I couldn't help, Mr. Chairman, in terms of looking at rates, say even in Jamaica, which Flow also operate, and going on their website, I noticed that they're what we're paying crazy money for substantially is basically being given away next door in our neighborhood. Case example, 20 megs is costing $28.66 equivalent CI per month, whereas we're paying well over $100 and something per month just to get 15 megs, and sometimes you can't get it. The question in all of that, Mr. Chairman, is what exactly is the ICTA doing /off-reg at this point, looking at in terms of what it is that they're tasked with where the public is concerned to tackle these costs. And it's nice that there's an extra 1.4 million came in royalties, but that 1.4 million came in as a result of $23 million more in revenues. And I can't help but wonder that extra $23 million, which the taxpayers only got back $1.4 million from, what exactly is the ICTA doing to deal with the high costs of internet in the Cayman Islands? That's my first question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, short answer is nothing. The reason, as an economic regulator, we regulate where the market fails. Prices for these services are not regulated. The market works as it needs to. It's based on supply and demand. It's based on what the market is willing to pay. In countries nearby, sometimes broadband, for example, is subsidized. Sometimes it is heavily regulated in terms of what they can and cannot charge. We don't have that environment. When the market was liberalized, the new entrants were allowed to compete and compete in an open and unfettered way. So the prices for most of our telecom services reflect the market, reflect supply and demand, and reflect the fact that in a market where you have 4 different ISPs, market forces will tend to dictate prices.
Unless there is collusion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when we had liberalization, telecom in particular prices dropped drastically in the first year. And then isn't it a fact that one of the 2 major telecoms went to court to get an injunction so prices couldn't be lowered anymore in terms of termination charge or something, if I recall, coming out in Finance Committee? Has that case ever been, that injunction ever been resolved in the court, or is it still there? And is why we can't get in a competitive pricing anymore?
I'm not aware of that specific case. I know that part of the liberalization negotiations, having been a part of it from the other side, involved the cross-subsidy at the time. So in most Caribbean markets, the business sector basically paid for the telecommunications network. It was not feasible or financially viable for the incumbent to deliver service to rural areas, but they were able to do so at a lower price than cost, because the usage by the business sector and government basically paid for it. So the cost of international calls, for example, used to be $1.20, $1.40 a minute to the U.S. Local calls were a lot more affordable, but it was this cross-subsidy principle that had been in place with the monopoly at the time, all across the Caribbean. In fact, in Barbados, local calls were free. So there's stories of ladies on the phone all day long, quite literally doing their washing, doing their cooking, coming back and just holding up the line all day because there was no charge. That's the extreme example of this cross-subsidy at work. That cross-subsidy had to be removed in order for the market to be liberalized, because the incumbent then needed to compete on local and international services. So there was a dramatic change in the cost of services. Local service costs went up in terms of line rental, in terms of calling rates, and the international calling rates went down dramatically, but also in part because there was competition from other services. These days we have international calls being offered by companies that we don't even regulate, such as WhatsApp and Viber. So the market has gone through a number of disruptions throughout the years. But to answer the member's question, with regards to prices for broadband, that is an area that we don't regulate, because there is sufficient competition in the marketplace to drive prices downwards.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking at the Utility Regulation and Competition Law 2016, and reading on Section 6 of the law, it says under the subheading Principal Functions of the Office. 6.1, the principal functions of the office in the markets and sectors for which it has responsibility are A, to promote objectives set out in any policy; B, to promote appropriate, effective, and fair competition; C, to protect the short and long-term interests of consumers in relation to utility service, and in so doing, 1, supervise, monitor, and regulate any sectoral provider in accordance with this law, the regulations and the sectoral legislation, and any general policies made by Cabinet in writing; and 2, ensure that utility services are satisfactory and efficient, and that charges imposed in respect of utility services are reasonable and reflect efficient costs of providing the services; and 3, publish information reports and other documents relating to utility services; and D, to promote innovation and facilitate economic and national development. I want to go back to Section 2, Mr. Chairman, when it says, ensure that utility services are satisfactory and efficient, and that charges imposed in respect of utility services are reasonable and reflect efficient costs of providing the services. That sounds as if though we do have some recourses as per the law, and that is the part that we have my little bee in the bonnet, in that we have allowed these guys to run rampant, and if there is teeth that we need to put in the law to deal with them, we need to deal with them. But we can't sit down and literally have the Cayman Islands, a member of both Digicel and Flow, that are multinational corporations, and based on the numbers I'm looking at and the research that I've found, and having worked for both companies in the past, I just wanted to declare that also, that I've worked for both Flow in a regional capacity, and I've worked for Digicel in a CFO capacity. So I have a little bit of an idea in terms of where I'm coming from. But the reality of it is we can't sit down and continue now to have Cayman subsidize other markets because we either A, lack the proper legislation to do so, or B, we lack the political will to do so. But we can't have the people of the Cayman Islands being ranked 190 out of 196 countries when it comes on to broadband. So the question then to the witness through you, Mr. Chairman, is what then would you suggest or propose that we do in order to fix it to get these prices down? Because this is one of the things that we have to fix.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the legislation that the member references is the umbrella law for off-reg. There are still sector-specific laws under which we grant licenses, under electricity, under water, under ICT. Within those laws, then there are concepts around significant market power. So, for example, in layman's terms, dominance. When, for example, the telecoms industry was liberalized, the incumbent was from day one dominant or exerted significant market power in certain areas such as fixed line voice services from day one, because the new entrants it was going to take some time for them to build their networks to be able to effectively compete. When we created off-reg, the fuels markets law basically declared that the importers, the two fuels importers and one propane importer that we had at the time, were dominant in their respective areas. So we didn't have to go through, in the case of telecoms and in the case of fuels, we did not have to go through a long economic analysis exercise to figure out who's dominant and what. That then gives the power to the regulator to look at prices, to look at the behavior of the provider in the market. So the provider can't do things like bundle their services together in order to offer a package, because it would be anti-competitive, because the new guys don't have that ability to bundle. They cannot compete with a provider who has services in places that they don't, or has the ability to control prices in a market. So as an economic regulator, we're concerned about the economic power that a provider has, and if it's demonstrated that they continue to have that power, then we will exert under the law, under the section of the law the member quoted, and under sections of the specific sector laws, to regulate that provider in terms of prices. What we don't have right now is, we have competition, but we don't have choice. This is a mantra that my staff will tell you I say all the time. The market in the telecom sector has proven itself to be extremely dynamic and competitive in Georgetown and 7 Mile Beach. So we have 4 ISPs, and they compete vigorously along the 7 Mile Beach corridor into a small part of West Bay and a lot of Georgetown for TV, for internet, and for telephone services. If you live beyond Countryside, however, you have no choice when it comes to a TV provider. You have no choice when it comes to, or very little choice when it comes to, an internet provider. So what I would say to the member is, our focus is not on price right now, but we as a regulator, since OFREG was formed, have done over a dozen consultations on things that relate to quality and choice. We've done a consultation on what we mean when we say broadband. What does that mean? Can 2 megabits be broadband, or should the definition of broadband be something like 50 or 100 meg? What it means to have quality of service. Does it mean that you get some of what you pay for some of the time, or does it mean you get all of what you pay for at least 80% of the time? That kind of quality of service is where we're focusing our efforts. And members would be aware that we have put our competitive ISP licensees on notice that they are all now in breach of a license obligation that they entered into years ago when they signed up to cover all of Grand Cayman with their fiber optic network. And the remedy for that breach is possibly a Eastern District fiber network, which will be funded by them in order to deliver what was promised and what they signed up to. That then delivers to more and more the residents of the country choice, the ability to choose between those packages. What we should see, to the member's point, is a much more competitive and robust marketplace where the prices will then reflect choices that folks are able to make. I don't have to lecture anyone here that some of the wealthiest people in the country live on that particular corridor where we have competition. The market has not saw fit to service areas that are either expensive to get to in terms of them being a sparsely populated area or far away from central Georgetown to extend the network, and places where people don't earn as much and have as much disposable income as the folks who live along 7 Mile Beach. The regulatory compact that was entered into when the market was liberalized is not being upheld, and that was that there would be a level playing field, that if you got a license to do internet service in Cayman, in the Cayman Islands, I should say, you would have to serve all of the people of the Cayman Islands. 15 years after liberalization, we're nowhere near that. And so as a regulator, we need to step in because the market is not working. And we believe, as folks who live and breathe this every day, that once we take steps to ensure that all of our citizens are served, the marketplace, the prices will change to reflect that more robust, competitive environment.
Sorry.
So my concern there, that history says that yes, the market price changes, but it's always going up.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, I understand where Mr. Ali is coming from in that regard, but where I fall down in this process is that there's an area of Newland Sunrise that has broadband. Now, that is still in the vicinity of other areas. So you can go to the back of Newlands and get fiber down there, but the rest of Newlands can't get it. I mean, that doesn't fly. But one of the things I want to raise, Mr. Chairman, and this was a letter from the 21st of March 2016 that the ICTA wrote to Cable and Wireless, or Flow, concerning their application to increase residential line rental rates. And not to go through the entire length of the letter, but just kind of take out, it says on 11th of February 2016, the authority received Lime's application to increase the monthly residential line rental rate by $1 from the current $17 per month to $18 per month effective 1st of June 2016. Lime's application included proposed tariff pages for general tariff item 201, public whatever. The authority has reviewed the application and notes the following statements made by Lime in its Q&A line rental increase as reasons for increasing the price of the residential line rate. 1, calls made from a home phone to 911 means the operator can quickly determine location. And 2, our competition is not investing/reinvesting at the levels we are, and in all cases not providing a full service across mobile, landline, internet, and TV across the entire country. Then it says the authority viewed that such a statement by Lime regarding the position of its competitors' investment level is unsubstantiated, and therefore Lime is not in a position to speak on the level of investing or reinvesting by its customers. It also says Lime's statement above is further disproven more generally by the authority's analysis of the ICT statistics collected by the authority on a quarterly basis, namely in relation to the capital expenditures in the ICT networks and services. Further, Lime's reference to a full service is misleading, as it is not qualified as being a reference to a quad play offering, and is likely read by the average consumer to mean that Lime's competitors' ICT services are not individual full services. Based on the above, the authority hereby approves the $1 increase to Lime's monthly residential line rental rate subject to the following conditions being satisfied. 1, basically, in essence, they remove statements from the Q&A. I am looking at this because it was done by the economists at the ICTA. And where I was a little bit lost is that having looked at the application myself, which I brought a copy with me here also, there was pretty nothing much in that application from what I saw that Lime submitted, and also the response from the ICTA on any financial reason as to why the consumer should have paid more for a list of those services that was basically included, other than the fact that within their Q&A they add out other statements. Now, when an economist is signing something and saying to someone that we're going to allow you to increase it, but you need to take these out of the Q&A, I'm trying to wonder what financial basis, what financial reason did Lime give. Now, I understand that, yes, that would be part of the extra 23 point whatever million that the consumers paid. I'm not saying that all of it is associated just to the $1 increase. But what I would be expecting from the regulator when someone is asking to increase prices, that at least they make a better case other than what is included in the Q&A. And this is what we need for the ICTA to do. I mean, right now, if we need teeth, we need to get teeth. But the flip side is, what was the economic reason given or the economic justification for giving Lime this $1 increase per month in the line rental? That's my question, Mr. Chairman, to the witness.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to reacquaint myself with that exact study, but generally, because C&W, then trading as Lime, now trading as Flow, had the only fixed line network in the country when the market was liberalized, they were declared dominant in that space upon liberalization. Typically, a regulator will do an economic analysis on a regular basis of the markets that it regulates in order to determine if a player is still dominant or if somebody else has become dominant, or there might be a co-dominant position where two players are effectively exhibiting significant market power. We've never done that economic study, so all we can do is take information that we have to hand and our own observations in order to inform our economic analysis. At that time, that would have been the way we would have made a determination. Is it economically reasonable for this increase to be granted, given that the player is still dominant in fixed line services? So they would have been regulated in terms of prices for the things that they were still dominant in, and fixed line services remains one of the areas where C&W does exhibit some dominance. I will say that in the lead up to the renewal of C&W's license, we are now going through an economic analysis of the markets where they were presumed to be dominant in the past. And that significant market power, or SMP review, is underway right now. You will see in short order some consultations around that with respect to what we call markets 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are fixed line services, fixed line voice services for local and international calling, and a future consultation in the months coming on other markets where we feel that C&W needs to be tested in terms of its dominance. All of that to say that at the end of the year, we expect to be able to draw a conclusion as to whether or not C&W is still dominant in any of these markets, and if they are, what changes that means that we should take into account on their new license going forward. The bottom line is, it's not a simple yes or no answer to whether or not they can have a price increase. It's an analysis of the impact that it's going to have on the market, the impact that it's going to have on competition, whether or not it's justified, etc. Back in 2016, when this particular analysis was done, the outcome was that it was reasonable for them to increase by that small amount for the line rental side of their business. But again, going forward, we would have to have a holistic view, which we're going through now, to see whether they truly are dominant and to what extent they remain dominant in services such as the one the member is mentioning, which sounds like fixed line voice.
Right. What is the significance of dominance? Am I understanding you correctly that if the ICTA determines that a particular provider is dominant, they will attempt to regulate their prices. But if they're not dominant, they just don't have any authority, or they choose not to try and regulate the prices.
As an economic regulator, you want to make sure that the market is functioning and that no player is skewing the market because they have dominance. They can have dominance because dominance is defined by the economists as the ability to control prices.
If anything an economist defines, I worry, because you automatically get in on the one hand and on the second hand. Are those kind of terms determined in the legislation, or?
Some of it is determined in the license conditions that the licensees have, but there are also standard economic principles at work here that every regulator abides by. There's standard formulas, there's standard testing procedures, there's standard ways of gathering data and doing the analysis in order to arrive at a conclusion in whatever market it might be, whether it's fuels or water, electricity, telecoms, any number of markets. It could be cooking oil. The tests that you go through to determine whether a player or a supplier is dominant is based on their ability to control or exert a degree of control on the market and on prices.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, through you, just looking back at Lime's application back then, it says, which one thing there? Why is Lime raising prices? That was the question, and then many customers still value. One of the part that jumps up is that they were referring to their investment, and the example they use is, one example of our significant investment is our 4G LTE mobile network, which has been rolled out across all 3 of the Cayman Islands, plus the rollout of super fast broadband to all residential areas in Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Little Cayman. Now, if they're just limiting their rollout of super fast broadband to the places where the people have money or people are wealthy, then the question is then, why are they allowed to charge everyone across the entire Cayman Islands for something that only a few are going to get? And you see, this, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, is really where I'm having an issue, in the sense that the customer, the consumer, ultimately, as per the law, needs some level of protection. And it is either the law is inadequate in dealing with these issues, or the regulator is inadequate in dealing with these issues. But at the end of the day, both of us, whether we are lawmakers or regulators, serve the public, and we need to, amongst ourselves, come back or sit down and try to go back to the public and say, listen, this is what we're going to do. But we can't sit down and have the Cayman Islands rank 190 out of 196 in terms of broadband costs. What I would ask the witness to do as they are negotiating with Cable and Wireless is to consider this, and this again is also taken a Lime flow from their application in terms of their local call rates. Fix to fix all location, 9 cents for the first minute, 2 cents for each minute thereafter, and fix to mobile, all location, 27 cents per unit. Now, when I go again, and I can't help myself, looking at our neighbor next door, their basic line plan rental for what we're basically paying $27 equivalent, they're paying $9.30 for the basic plan equivalent CI. Then there's a second plan for $11.30, and then there's a real top of the line plan where you get 1,000 minutes to call and a local mobile and everything for $13.30 CI per minute. And on top of that, their calls, domestic calls, cost less than the equivalent of 1 cent CI, and to call mobile is literally less than 2 cents. So I mean, we're paying 27 cents, they're paying less than 2 cents. I mean, these are the kind of things that when we do go to sit back with Lime, Flow, or whichever name they'll be going by at the time, that we need to take into consideration for the consumers. But the telecoms cost is one of the, if you look in the consumer protection reports, it is one of the items that is featured as one of the cost drivers for the CPI. And on top of that, when you do understand now, when you're looking at even CUC license, there are also increases based on increases within the CPI. So we need to be going through everything that we can do to make sure that we lower the costs to get to the to get what's best for the consumer. But the bottom line is, Mr. Chairman, through you, in the form of a question, is what then during the negotiations with Lime what can we basically expect that the off-reg will be doing to get some of these costs down during the next negotiation with their license?
Mr. Chairman, the license renewal process with all of the telcos is coming up. C&W's is just first. And the discussion with them will be about moving to a framework that is fairer to all of them, but has expectations of all of them. So, for example, to basically answer the member's question in as short a possible way as possible, we don't plan on regulating prices. We plan on making sure the market is able to serve all of the consumers and give those consumers choice and let those consumers then decide who they would like to go with. In the area where the member lives, for example, nobody down that street has much of a choice when it comes to fiber. You may not even be able to get fiber from the one provider that is in that area. The prices that you pay are reflective of the fact that you have no choice as a consumer.
Mr. Kapin, I'm troubled by you saying you're not making any attempt to regulate prices, because it is clear from your evidence that there are areas that get better service than certain other areas, but the areas of the poor service are being charged the same price as those that getting the good service. Why isn't the ICTA insisting that there's a differentiation in price based on what's available? Because I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that there are people on the Queens Highway, for instance, that have fiber. They got across my house to get to the Queens Highway, but I don't have fiber. I understand that there are people along High Rock to which we have run fiber, but there are people on that street who have no access to it, even though I have requested of Flow to provide me with fiber. They keep telling me, all the technicians telling me that they have fiber in I don't know what they call their panel box, less than 1/8 of a mile from my light pole to connect it to, but I can't have fiber. How are they allowed by the regulators to discriminate in this way? Your evidence suggests that the rich people on West Bay Road are getting it not because they're demanding it, not because there's competition, but just because it's available, and I am paying the same price as the people on 7 Mile Beach. And then the other thing that confuses me is when they come to my house to hook me up, and this is not something I imagine, the technician will call up somebody and say, well, we're not really getting enough here, boost it up a little bit so we can get a better picture. I mean, literally. Why isn't it that I am given the full boost to start with, and then what they charge me for is 80% of the full boost? For instance, I think you give them you tend to give them a leeway of, you say if I'm paying for 10 and I'm getting 6 or 8, that's okay. They should have to put in my area 15 and I pay for 10 for when I only get a percentage of the full amount.
Our approach is to regulate the services, not the prices, and let the market dictate prices.
Sorry.
The way we plan,
But that's not working.
Hold on.
it-
Sorry.
it's not working because the fundamentals are that the license obligations that were put upon all of them, they are now in breach of.
Well, why aren't they held in breach of that? Because I'm a little troubled when you say you're trying to look for a new framework that is fair to all but carries expectations, because we've had expectations all along that all the Cayman was going to be served equally, but for years nobody is canceling a water license because they haven't met the conditions of it.
So the way we're addressing the license obligations that they were in breach of is to establish a universal service network for the eastern districts that will be funded by the licensees
So
who
we're
are in breach.
So the government is finding a way to subsidize their investment and provide an investment for them that they should have done 20 years ago when they got their license?
The government, through off-reg, will build the network and they will pay for it because it is clear the market has failed to do what it was supposed to do under its license obligations. This is not a new thing. This is common among every developed nation where you have rural areas that cannot be economically served. A universal service network paid for through some sort of universal service fund is usually used in order to serve those customers. In fact, the UK has just announced something similar where customers can apply for this universal service funding up to, I believe it's £3,400 in costs to service. They might be a rural farmer miles and miles away from the nearest road, for example. So the costs involved in connecting him to the network can be higher than someone who lives in a village or a city. But the principle is still the same. Yes, there are some costs involved in connecting someone who lives down a long, windy path in the countryside. But there needs to be a mechanism to make sure that that person is not left with no choice and no access to services just because of where they live. That in and of itself is a form of discrimination which regulators around the world address through mechanisms like a universal service network. So the plan is to address the lack of connectivity and the lack of choice in eastern districts of Grand Cayman through a universal service network. The other areas that you speak to, Mr. Chairman, with regards to getting what you pay for is related to another effort that is underway at the office, which is going to establish standards for quality of service. The broadband consultation that we've just completed is the first step in that direction. By defining what broadband is and how we will measure it, we will then establish or be able to establish a set of quality of service standards. What we envision happening is that if you as a licensee expect to sell something called broadband in any of its forms under that particular part of your license, it must meet certain standards. It must, for example, deliver at least, let us say, for example, 80% of what you have contracted even during the busy period, not 4 o'clock in the morning, but during the busy periods, and sometimes there's 2 busy periods in a given geography. That's the way we can get to the quality of service that we're looking for, the choice that was promised when we liberalized the marketplace. And those are the 2 things that we feel is our duty and our priority to regulate. We believe that prices will be the outcome of an effective competitive marketplace, and it's premature for us to look at prices until we figure out the underlying infrastructure that drives choice and availability and the quality issues that plague everyone in the country today.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, well, first of all, I am not prepared to tell the people of Barton West that they're rural, and nor is Savannah, Newlands, or anywhere else, especially when you do consider that people in the Newlands area are receiving fiber. So the question for me then to the witness, Mr. Chairman, through you, is why stop in the eastern districts? Because once again, we're going to create a model now where we allow these guys to cherry pick, and then the government end up subsidizing. Why not just roll out the entire network across the entire island? Tell with them. If they can, if we're going to do it for everybody. Because if not, we'll be guilty of the same thing that we're accusing the telecoms of, where we're now focusing on one area and not the other area. So the question is, if we're going to roll out the network, roll it out across the entire island, not just the eastern district. And that way, the cost will be much better and the people will have better choice. Don't stop there. Because if not, then the taxpayers will be paying for something that these guys should be doing, and they'll be making $23 million extra per year that you didn't even think they were going to make. Don't stop there. Roll it out to the whole island.
Chairman.
To answer the members, I'm not sure if that was a question or a proposal.
To put it in a question form, why not roll out the entire island then?
Okay. First of all, we're not subsidizing anything. They will be paying for all of this. Secondly, we're not actually building a network. If you consider a network as the thing that provides the service to you, that's not what we're rolling out. What we're rolling out is a connection, the fiber connection from your house to their network. So basically, the architecture that we're exploring will set up what's called a meet-me point. It might be in Bordentown near the primary school, it might be near the police station, but a meet-me point. All of the competitors' networks will come to that meet-me point. Beyond that meet-me point will be what we're calling Eastern District Fiber, or Edify, which will be a passive network that runs through the ducts and along the poles out towards homes. When Granny in East End calls one of the providers and says, I want your TV service, that provider goes to the meet-me point and makes a connection to Edify. He then drives out to Granny's house and puts a connection from the pole or the nearest cabinet to her house and installs his box in her house. All Edify has done is bridge the gap between the house and their network, which is now at the meet-me point. What that does is it makes it a lot more efficient to deliver services to the areas of Grand Cayman which are sparsely populated. By sparsely, basically what we're looking at is housing density that falls off dramatically after Bordentown Police Station. We're working with the Department of Planning right now to determine exactly where that density falls off, so we can determine where the boundary line is for Edify. We feel that Edify should be as small as it needs to be, and that they need to build out up until that boundary. We think it's somewhere in Bordentown. So the meet-me point would be there, and our Edify would be as passive, as simple, as inexpensive a connection between that meet-me point and the resident's home as possible. They will still provide the service. They will still provide all of the bells and whistles that their particular network provides as opposed to their competitor's network, but customers will no longer have one choice and one choice only, and that provider is using some combination of copper and fairy dust to deliver substandard service to the customer.
So, quick question. Understanding the culture of both Lime, Flow, and Digicel, does anyone honestly believe that those guys are going to pay for it and not pass the cost on to the consumer?
Mr. Chairman, C&W is not one of the entities who have a license obligation to extend a fiber network across the island. They already had a network in place. It was the competitive networks who got licenses to compete with cable and wireless who agreed to a license obligation that they would service the entire country by rolling out their network. And the regulator then received regular reports from the providers as to their fiber rollout plan. And that fiber rollout plan has shown us that they've had extreme difficulty in rolling out their networks, in part because they didn't invest, in part because they couldn't get access to buried ducts, and in part because they couldn't get effective and efficient access to poles in order to connect their network and build out their network along the way, all of which we are dealing with, but separately.
So just so I'm clear, Mr. Chairman, I just understand from the witness that Lime does have the network out there. So then the question is then, why isn't it available to the public if the network is there?
Their network is built out, and it is available. Anybody in the country can get, can get
Fiber.
phone service. Their network is not 100% fiber. They have a HFC. It's a hybrid network that's partly fiber and partly copper.
Okay, but the reason I'm asking the question, and not to be get tied up in the small details. But per their own application, they're saying that they needed to increase the costs because they're rolling out super fast broadband across the island, and that was one of the justifications given for them chucking up the monthly line rental and other fees. So then the question is this then, if we allow them to raise the fees based on what it is that they have said here, and they're not delivering what they said they would have delivered, then wouldn't the natural thing to say, wait a minute, we approve this fee based on you say you're doing X, you have not done X, so we take them back off the fee.
Just because they say they're good looking doesn't mean I agree.
Exactly. So that's so the point I'm trying to get
just
at.
because they've said that we need more, we are entitled to this because we're great, because we did LTE, because we're doing this, doesn't mean that that's what we would take into consideration. Anything that involves an increase to a regulated price, such as fixed line rental, which is part of their the areas that they're still dominant, they're still considered to be dominant in. The economic analysis would not take into consideration some magical thing they did with mobile. That has nothing to do with our analysis. Just because they put it in the letter doesn't mean that we're going to take it into consideration.
But the point I'm making is, in both their submission, which is available on your website, and your response to them, which is available on your website, there was no reference to any economic decision that was made, other than to say, fix this part of your marketing and you can get your dollar increase. There was no economic analysis available. None. So the question then I have to ask is then, what decision, because I can only base my questions and my assumptions on what they submitted and what you guys replied. Nothing economic, other than to say, take that out of your Q&A, take that out of your Q&A, and take that out of your Q&A. So then the question is then, what basis did the regulator use to say, we're going to give you this increase? They didn't give an economic reason, and ICTA didn't respond with an economic reason.
I can provide the committee with that economic analysis. You have a good point. It wasn't part of the published documentation, but it does exist.
Okay.
Still want to know, how is it that your licensee can lay out fiber network, right, to a particular customer, and customers along the way are not given access to that fiber network? Because if they can still do that, then you're providing them with a framework. It isn't going to help anything. They're still only going to go for the one that they believe is going to sign up for 20 or 40 or 50 or 100 megs and leave the little householder along the way who only wants 10 megs unserviced.
I don't want to defend any one provider over another, but I would say if you bought a house in Miami that was directly underneath I-95, it doesn't mean that you can just drive out of your driveway and get right onto that interstate. You might have to go a little ways down the road to get onto an on-ramp before you can join the interstate. So the fact that a fiber cable runs outside of your house doesn't necessarily mean that it can be easily accessed. The way that some of the networks are designed is that that fiber feeds a cabinet. That cabinet then converts that fiber into DSL or into copper-based services. And then from there, the copper is used to transport services to the house, which might mean going back along the same road that the fiber came, back to your house, for example, that the fiber crossed. But it's just the architecture of the network. That particular architecture is not what is used by the competitive entrants who do not use copper in any part of their delivery mechanism, to my knowledge. Those providers use a completely different architecture which delivers fiber to the customer's premises, and the box that they actually install either outside your home or in your house, what we sometimes call a modem, actually terminates that fiber into the back of the modem. Whereas with the other network, what you're getting is a copper line into your house for phone service or DSL, and then somewhere else down the road, that copper is converted to the fiber network, which then delivers that service from your house down to their main core network in town or in Bordentown.
Suppose a group of people on a particular street or along the streets from their cabinet where they have the fiber applied collectively and were willing to pay to have fiber from that cabinet put in, and the provider refused to do it. Does the regulator have any authority to say, listen, you have to do it, and even if they pay for it in the first instance, you have to reimburse them through credit or some other mechanism?
In that particular case, directly, Mr. Chairman, no. What we would need to do is to have those customers make a case that they were being unfairly treated or discriminated against because of a lack of service that could have been rectified cost effectively by doing what you're suggesting. So,
and how do I demonstrate that? Would you be willing to accept? Google, I think, does one where I can test the speed of my internet download. Could I keep a week record of what I was getting at various times of the day, and then present that to the ICTA and say, listen, I am paying for 10. Here is my records that over the last 2 weeks, the maximum I've gotten is 6, and most of the time I'm getting 3. Would that be something that the ICTA could act upon and force the provider to get at least 80% that you say is okay? Because you see, I would like you to say, if I'm paying for 10, that is the 80% of what they're providing. That's the minimum I'm going to get, as opposed to I'm paying for 10 and you will accept that 8 is okay.
right. As a quasi-judicial entity, I wouldn't want to prejudge any prospective complaints that are either ongoing or might come before us. I would say to you that we don't get enough complaints, number one. We would welcome more folks such as yourselves telling us what's going on, telling us what is happening, what you're experiencing out there so that we can hold our licensees accountable. Number two, any evidence that you're able to provide, we would take into consideration. It might be questioned or challenged by the licensee, but we would still welcome it. Number three, to address exactly what you're referring to, that is quality of service. We recognize, as do many other regulators around the world, that there is a need for an independent assessment of quality of service, not the customer, not an IT company, not the regulator, but an independent body to be able to evaluate and collect data on quality of service. To that end, just yesterday, we signed a memorandum of understanding with an entity that we've been courting and pursuing aggressively for the last 1.5 years out of England, called Sam Knows, who maintain a network of testing facilities that will do exactly that. Be able to give us an independent statistical analysis, not on an ad hoc basis, not at your house because you called for it, but an ongoing basis through randomly selected participants around the country, feeding Sam Knows, and they can then provide us with a report as to how each and every one of the providers are doing with respect to the contracted speeds that the customer should be expecting. And it is through that kind of mechanism that we anticipate to hold our licensees accountable for the quality of service that they're delivering to the customer. Not an ad hoc basis where maybe a complaint comes in, maybe it doesn't, but a proactive, consistent monitoring regime that holds our licensees accountable.
You're contracting an independent company to provide for this testing. Care to unveil what that's going to cost? Because I'm probably going to wind up paying for that too.
This entity has not given us the cost, but the way their model works is they basically are able to provide advice to their clients, which are governments and service providers, based on the data that they're able to collect. So they have a worldwide organization. Obviously, we are concerned about privacy issues. We don't want uniquely identifiable information to be made available either to the contractor or to anyone else that might buy their services. But what we do want them to be able to do is they need to know, for example, that you have contracted for 10 meg, but you're only getting 5. They need to know that so they can flag it to us to say that this particular line is underperforming. What they don't need to know is what your dog's name is and you know, your post office box number and where you bank. So we've got to balance how much information we provide to the contractors and protect the privacy of the people who are participating in that ongoing survey. The details of that we need to work out, but we're cognizant that privacy needs to be borne in mind as we move forward. But we have to balance that with the power that these entities can offer to small jurisdictions like ours. It was a struggle to get them to sit at the table with us because they're dealing with the likes of Verizon and British Telecom and Ofcom in the UK and so forth. We've finally managed to get them to sit down and talk to us, and they're actually looking at us as a potential way of giving back and expanding into underserved communities, whatever it takes to get that kind of power in the hands of the regulator and in the hands of the consumer, we're going to try to effect.
Yes, some time ago, 2 years ago, by motion by the member for Easton and myself, we managed to get some penalties put in the ICTA law. Unfortunately, the government didn't put it in the way we wanted to put it in. They put it in up to $500,000. And our concern with that was that when you start talking numbers like 500,000, providers like Flow and Digicel just going to lawyer up and it'll never get anything decided. Is the administrative fine structure going to be introduced to help you regulate these providers? For instance, to say, if your independent regulator determines that at my house, as an example, I am paying for 10, but I'm only getting 5 over a period of time, is the legislation are you going to attempt to change the legislation to allow you to administratively fine that company, say a $5,000 fine, which is much better to pay because a phone call to a lawyer can cost more than $5,000, and have a daily ride on it of maybe another $2,000 until it is corrected, and your monitor will show that it has been corrected consistently? Or are we going to rely on taking them to court up to 500,000?
The fines that the House approved were, if memory serves, up to $500,000 per incident, and a daily fine of up to $25,000 a day until the breach is corrected. That gives us considerable latitude.
But it has never been used once in that 2-year period, has it?
Yes. We have just issued a draft determination on a licensee that we found in breach of their license, and the fine is in excess of $1.2 million.
Good. Okay. The other, I guess I've been around this too long, but some time ago, in either in Finance Committee or a prior PAC, there was some concern that some of the local providers may in fact have been billing in other services provided here in other jurisdictions and accounting for it in other jurisdictions so that we couldn't apply the 6% to that revenue. Has that been resolved, and are all of their services that they now provide in the Cayman being billed in Cayman, to which the 6% is subject to?
I'm not aware of any specific instance where that kind of offshoring is happening. We would take a very dim view on that. In fact, we have reached out to a number of regulators in the Caribbean about setting up bilateral arrangements where we can share information because we all tend to regulate one or two of the same entities. In recent discussions in Jamaica, for example, they're concerned because one of their entities has now merged with another. They are trading as two separate entities because one is listed on the stock exchange and the other one is not, but the branding is combined and is the same. So they're very concerned about customer data getting mishandled or mismanaged and how the tax implications, they call it tax, we call it royalties, might have an impact. So we're in discussions with regulators around the region about how to share evidence of certain practices because these are all global entities, and identify to each other when we see questionable practices or we conduct investigations on some of these entities which we all regulate to be able to help identify those kinds of issues that you've raised, Mr. Chairman.
You have a question?
Yes, sir. The chairman, through you, you already covered one on the penalties, which I was here when yourself and the member from Eastern had carried those on. Have these companies given you any explanations? You got Northwest Point Road, because you all keep talking Eastern districts, and it seems as if you think the golden state of West Bay has everything. We rural as well. Going down Turtle Farm Road, you have fiber optic. 300 feet from that is Glidden Lane, which I think you know well. 16 homes just in that little street. You have Watercourse Road, which comes off of Northwest Point Road. No fiber optics. So it can't be because of the excuse when I hear that they're sparsely populated areas. Those areas are well populated, and we don't have it yet to have it on the street. That I'm not going to say here who's mainly on that street. No, the politician street don't have it. So have they given you an explanation for that for West Bay? I can understand, okay, if you want to argue that sparsely populated up on the eastern side, why not so in populated areas?
Mr. Chairman, through you, we have looked at the coverage maps for fiber rollout for our licensees, and West Bay is poorly covered. Whatever the rationale might be for eastern districts in terms of density, in terms of distance from the core, in terms of whatever the argument might be, does not exist in the areas in West Bay that remain to this day uncovered or underserved by fiber. We will not accept any of those excuses, and we will hold our licensees accountable to completing the rollout of their networks, which will include West Bay. We consider everything west of the boundary, wherever that boundary might be in Bordentown, everything west of that is competitive territory, and we expect all of our licensees to fully cover all of that territory, including the unserved and underserved areas of West Bay.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I just want to make for the record that Bordentown West is the second largest constituency, only beaten by Bordentown East, and Bordentown is the second largest in terms of population and the largest in terms of land mass, and the fastest growing. The thing about it is, Mr. Chairman, through you, we do recognize, and like I said, I don't want it, I do recognize that the ICTA themselves has their own challenges. Like I said, I've been working Digicel and Flow, well, Cayman Wireless before, and understand the culture of the people we're dealing with. They're creatures of habit, and they're not very easy to deal with. I can tell anybody that. So I do sympathize with the regulators in that regard, in terms of the battle that they have ahead of them. It's not easy. We have companies with very deep pockets, and I think that the current chairman of OFREG, Mr. Pearson, would recall that even during the liberalization talk, that the CEO at the time for Cayman and Wireless West Indies bragged that they had enough money to bankrupt the Cayman Islands government if they push themselves too much. So I don't want the public to believe that, you know, it's something that's very easy to do. It is difficult to understand those guys. What we want to make sure here, and at least going forward, is that if we need to make changes to legislation, let's make it. If we need to put in more teeth, let's do it. But the thing about it is, and this is the question to Mr. Famo, is that price has got to be a component. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, one, it's required by law, and two, what really determines quality is what you're paying for it. So you can't just have a quality for something, and we end up that only Haiti alone, which is, again, poor. So if you were to run it in different areas, I can understand someone paying $224. But we can't have people next door paying $18, $19 a month for broadband, and people on the side right next door for the same company paying what it is. We have the same issue with roaming. I mean, what some of the roaming bills that people have been charged is literally almost criminal. When you do consider that most of the telecoms companies have fixed contract with U.S. carriers. So it's not as if to say they're being charged, because I can tell you, they realized what was going through the billing mechanism was too expensive. They just went a flat rate. And I mean, and for what these guys are charging people on flat rate type stuff is criminal. One of the things I want to touch on, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's important for us that the public do recognize that ICT do have a challenge and responsibility, and the people that they're dealing with are very difficult to deal with. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the public and those companies know that we intend to come for them, because I'm going to tell you right now, I intend to go for them. For the money that they're making and for what people are paying, I'm taking that on as a pet project. One of the things I want to touch on, Mr. Chairman, is the ICTA consultation 2016-2. In a sense, it was just the whole issue on the polls, the poll issue that some companies were having with CUC's data link. And one of the things that jumped out of that report to me, I'm just going to read it briefly and just so we can touch on it, is question C2, where it says, provide your view on whether each of the relevant components of the pricing formula for calculation of the annual attachment fee, including but not limited to net cost of bare pole, space factor, etc. One of the comments that jumped out was on Flo's response to question, that same question C2, concerning the net cost of bare pole. Is basically the issue that they came back with, was saying the net cost of bare pole is overstated, and this is what the response was. Data Link calculates the net cost of bare pole to be $900, which we believe significantly overstates Data Link's true net cost. Based on information provided to CWC in quarterly invoices from CUC, the net cost of bare pole varies by height of the pole as follows. 35-foot wooden pole, $199.45. 40-foot wooden pole, $371.20. And 45-foot wooden pole equals $1,007.91. And it goes on to say, the majority of CUC poles in the Cayman Islands, with the exception of certain poles in the Georgetown area, are 35 feet in height. Assuming the $900 net cost figure cited by Data Link is based on an average cost of all installed poles or poles utilized by the attachers, it is unclear how Data Link arrived at such a high figure, almost equal to the cost of the subset of CUC's tallest, most expensive poles. Based on our review, the most recent quarterly invoice received from CUC, the average height of installed poles is approximately 39 feet, and the average cost of installed pole is approximately $533. Therefore, we believe Data Link's calculation overstated the true net cost of bare pole by 69% or $367. Now, I raise that question because one of the issues I know that some companies have been using is that they're basically being overcharged, or Data Link / CUC is incorporating in terms of the fiber that they want to roll out. I also read the authority's decision that came through, and I just wanted to put it out there that on the consultation that the ICTA sent, the digital response was a 2-page letter, which basically said, yeah, whatever. And then Infinity basically came back basically saying to that question they had no comment. And I also read the ICTA's decision. But I was a little bit unclear in terms of what the final outcome of, in terms of reading that decision. And I just wanted for clarity, just a clarification, is what ultimately was the outcome of that whole issue with the poll debate between those guys and Data Link? Just in brief form, because I couldn't get that from out of the what I found on the website.
The ability for telecoms to attach to poles is the most cost-effective way for network rollout in any country. Putting things underground is great. It adds to resilience in terms of hurricanes and so forth, but it's expensive, especially where underground facilities like ducts and manholes do not exist. So CUC was required to get a separate license under a separate wholly owned subsidiary, so that their CUC license, their electricity license with ERA, was completely separate from their ICT license from the ICTA at the time under this subsidiary called Datalink, and Datalink would then manage the pole attachment space, which at the time only Cable and Wireless was in, but other companies wanted to attach to. The industry from day one had issues with Datalink, with procedures, with costs, with time delays, with the whole process of what is referred to as make ready, which is creating the space or securing the pole through guy wires or whatever is required to enable additional attachments to the pole. As a result, we brought the whole industry together in a series of facilitated discussions about all the various issues, and basically took one of 6 or 7 issues and issued a determination on it, which was on reservation fees. Basically, licensees were being told that they had to pay a reservation fee for a pole or whole span of poles to secure that space. And then when they came to make their attachments, then they discovered that the space wasn't actually there, that it had to be created either by putting in a taller pole or separating the power from what was there to create the space. The authority took the decision that the reservation fees and the whole process around that was not fair, and instructed them to remove it from their contracts and do away with it. Immediately, the decision was challenged under the process known as judicial review. Because we're quasi-judicial, any appeal to our decisions goes to the High Court. And that's where we are today. We're in court. I would hazard to say we've probably spent in excess of $300,000 in legal fees, and our decision is pending in June or July of this year. And at that point, we will have to reassess how we approach this part of our regulatory responsibility, because it is simply too costly for our licensees to continue down this path with Datalink, and customers are the ones who are hurting at the end of the day, because they can't get the service because the guys can't connect, or the connection is too expensive for them to justify.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but again, hasn't all of CUC poles and other infrastructure, were they paid for specifically by the consumers post-I-1 through a monthly surcharge? If I recall, it was something like $6 or $7 per month that we were infrastructure surcharge or something that all consumers had to pay for all the CUC light poles that were put in. And now we're turning around charging $1,000 for 6 inches of the pole to hang a wire.
I don't know the details behind it, but yeah, there were a large number of poles were replaced after Hurricane Ivan at the public expense.
Sorry, just to put that in context, because I don't want to leave that out there hanging, but that was something I looked into in preparing for this PSC. And I think at the time, it was the intention to generate $35 million as part of the hurricane recovery. So I'm just speaking ballpark. And when I look at CUC's balance sheet, their generation and transmission and distribution asset was to the tune of maybe either like $400 and something million, $200 and something million back then. It has since gone up well. So when I did look at the actual cost in terms of what it is compared to what in terms of recovery, it was probably represented maybe about more, maybe 10 or 15% of the total cost. So in defense, as much as it's been a good soundbite, I don't. It wasn't the entire network that we paid for.
That's certainly the impression the consumers got. I don't think
Yeah,
that I'm
well,
the only one that believed.
Yeah,
that
no.
$7
I
a
had
month
the
was paying
same.
for the.
In fairness, Mr. Chairman, I had the same impression too. I even went back and saw the pretty little picture of the member from East End during, in terms of the researches and everything else. And that's one of the things that has remained inside the contract. As a matter of fact, I think I did print off the article at the time where you're saying that CUC's surcharge was necessary. Going back, I think when the issue got raised up, I know I printed off somewhere. Yeah, CUC surcharge clause necessary, and it was the December 4, 2007 edition of the Cayman Compass. I guess back then it was decent, so I guess we can probably go with the reporting. Yeah, but no, it's just one of the things. And
The larger question I have is, when the regulators are finished now and they're getting all this additional, CUC is getting all this additional income for their polls, are the consumers going to be refunded on some pro rata basis? Or is that outside the scope? But I guess I'll just start to the off-reg man to come in after you, because you don't have nothing to do with CUC. Okay, I wrote it down for him. Any other questions?
no, I just one closing question to the witness. First of all, I want to say thanks for coming down here. You don't have an easy job. I mean, I can tell anyone that. I haven't been on the other side of being regulated by the ICTA. I know because I used to give them problems in my former life too. So, and it wasn't easy dealing with people like us. The question I have really is, where ultimately do you see, or what do you think, the off-reg in terms of your sector of telecommunication, where exactly would you like for it to be? Very forward-looking. Because ultimately, what do you think best would be for the consumer in terms of your role? Because I'm still a little bit, I guess, concerned in terms of the regulators going in now to provide something that these guys should have been doing. And in essence, I see it as a departure of something a regulator shouldn't be doing, but naturally it needs to be done, so someone has to do it. But the flip side is ultimately, what legislation or what teeth do you need, or you think we need to give you to say, you know what, this is ultimately is going to be best for the consumers of this country. But we cannot, and I'm going to tell you right now, 190 out of 196 ranked in terms of the cost of broadband is not something that anyone in this household will be proud of, neither on the opposition or the government side. And not we would like more to go back and say to the Caymanian people, we'll reduce this from 172 down to at least X cost, but it can't continue like this, and not with the poor service that we're getting on the speeds that we're basically paying for something we're not getting. So the question is, what do you think ultimately you would like to see done in terms of law or whatever it is, or teeth given or whatever given to your organization to make sure that the consumer itself is protected and getting value for money?
One of the things that's driving costs in Cayman, for broadband in particular, is off-island connectivity. Off-island connectivity is still provided by one provider through both cables. And the concern that we have is that there is a degree of there's dominance there, indisputably. But that will come out as part of our economic analysis that we're doing right now. But when you have both of your links out of your country, the only way for you to get off island on voice or internet, controlled by one company, you have a problem. What we have done, bearing in mind that those two links are now over 20 years old, are reaching their end of life, and were never designed for internet traffic 25 years ago when they were built, is to actively seek out other investors who are willing to bring multiple submarine cables into the Cayman Islands to protect and diversify our internet connectivity, to drive down prices and drive down costs, to improve the resilience of the economy, because without this connectivity, our economy simply shuts down, and to also then drive economic growth, because we believe that we can be more than just a provider of services to our local customers, but we can offer services to nearby territories who are also in the same boat as us, being served by very old infrastructure that's controlled by one, maybe two companies that serve all of Central America and all of the Caribbean. So in and of itself, what that will do is dramatically change the broadband landscape for the consumer, and the resilience and performance, because right now we believe that our what you call latency, which is basically how long it takes for a packet to get from your house to the real internet, which is actually begins for us in Miami right now, is too long, because the systems that we go through to get there were designed for voice traffic 25 years ago. So by bringing new technologies and additional providers into that space, we believe that we can dramatically impact in a positive way many of the concerns that we've been talking about here this morning. In order to do that, we don't need legislation, but we do need, and we've advised Cabinet that we'll be asking for a specific directive to help us become a one-stop shop and encourage that foreign investment into Cayman. We have what I believe is a good overarching umbrella law in the IRC law, the law that created OFREG to begin with. But honestly, what is a huge time suck for us is the incompatibility that we have under the URC law as a regulator with the public authorities law, which we warned the government about when it was a bill, but those inconsistencies, serious inconsistencies that directly contradict one another between our enabling legislation and the public authorities law need to be addressed. So we hope that we can work with Cabinet to bring that to the House as soon as possible, whether it's a change to the IRC law or a change to the public authorities law. It doesn't really matter, but those inconsistencies, when you're a quasi-judicial entity, you are a creature of the law, and anything that jeopardizes that consistency jeopardizes your ability to fulfill your mission.
Thanks very much. Just one quick question, and the reason why I'd raise the whole legislation issue is if every single time that offer goes and make a decision, and it's going to end up in court, where you're talking about multi-million, multi-billion-dollar companies, where $3-4 million in legal fees is really nothing, but your ability to fight it would be a challenge. And the question is, clearly there's something short in the law, because we do need to recognize that we don't want to create a situation where every single decision that the OFREG makes become challenged by these deep pockets. So then the question is, what amendments or what do we need to change to make sure, listen, up to a certain point, what you guys say is final? I mean, earlier you spoke about that $1.2 million fee. I know for sure them guys are going to lawyer you up like crazy. You know what I mean? And by the time you probably get it and what you're going to spend, the time and the net result, it may probably come back to zero. You know what I mean? And so, it would just defeat the purpose, and the lawyers get rich. You know what I mean? And people basically get nothing. So that in itself is an issue. Now, I think in the Maya one, I thought that was a consortium of companies that actually owns that cable. I know the CGFS, which is the Cayman Jamaica Fiber, that's fully 100% flow. But I know in the Maya one, that in itself is a consortium. But the thing about it is that drives me crazy, and again, going back, is it costs about 1 cent to terminate a call to say MCR or one of those guys in the States going over the Maya one, but yet to call a neighbor next door on a cable and wireless network costs more than it is to send a call to Miami. I mean, and again, this is where the issue comes back to me with price. There's no way you're supposed to be sending traffic all the way up on the Maya one, paying it 1 cent for that US, thereabouts. But yet, Lime is charging you 2 cents CI, 250, 240 US to call the neighbor next door on the same poles that have been around forever and a day, that has been paid for many times over. I mean, this is really where the public is, in essence, getting the short end of the stick. And those are the kind of things that we need to fix, because at the end of the day, we're still a consumption-based country, and everything that comes out of the pocket, one way or the other, we still have some of the highest ARPUs, average revenues per user within the Caribbean. And again, it's not something to brag about, but it's something that these guys live for. And whether we want to accept it or not, we are subsidizing other islands. And that is one of the things I hope that the ICTA will tackle. But the cost is one of them that has to come down. But Mr. Famo, I really want to thank you for coming here today. Like I said, it's not easy in terms of what it is that you're doing. I think you've been very candid. You have answered most of the questions as best as you can, and we really appreciate it. And if there's anything that we can do to help you protect the public, just let us know, because that's ultimately what we're here for. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Ford, I'd just like to also thank you for your time, and we appreciate your forthright answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.